but I'm just going to quickly introduce our speaker today. So we have Anna Stutter Garcia, and she is a senior learner experience designer at Babbel. Babbel is a market-leading language learning product that teaches languages for real-world communication. Her focus is on uncovering and solving user engagement needs in the end-to-end learning journey. Before joining Babbel, Anna did a Ph.D. in psycholinguistics at the Research Institute in Germany, and as a language learner teacher prior to that. And now she continues to geek out in a more fast-paced environment. I'm really excited to be having Anna join us today. She's one of our alumni, and we're just really excited. I'm excited to hear this talk. So I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Anna. So let's go on the learning curve of going to the next slide. I am experimenting and trying different keys, and sometimes one responds, sometimes the other doesn't and does. So yeah, bear with me. So yeah, super happy to be here. I love the Founder Institute, so was really happy to show my experience and my work in the talk. So as Hannah said, I'm gonna take you through the journey of being in that meeting room and feeling like there's a question burning in your mind that you really want to ask, but you also know that it might have some disruptive consequences, and actually realizing the worth of it after the journey and how it actually has had a key impact on the strategy of the product in this case. So the presentation is structured in 3 parts. First, I'll bring you into the context. What were the conditions, what was going on, who was in the room, the feelings, the consequences. Then I'll show you kind of like the stages of the journey. So what I learned through each part, what worked, what didn't work. And then I'll just share with you the learnings, what I take home from this experience. Yeah. So there we go. So for context, as Hannah said, I work at Babbel, a language learning app. So language is the key of the experience. We have 14 languages that we offer and over 2 million subscribers. So quite a bunch of people learning with us. And we offer the self-learning app, which, as you can see, it's kind of like about real life communications, that you get comfortable and having these, small conversations here and there with the real world. And we also offer live lessons, so you can speak with a teacher, and we have other types of media too on top, so podcasts, videos on YouTube, magazine articles. So check us out if you're interested. So there, what do I do at Babbel? I'm a senior learner experience designer, which is quite a mouthful, but essentially think about it as a UX designer that has the learning science background and brings it into the picture for a learning product. So the teams that I work with, we work in what is called the engagement experience area. So the Babbel product is structured around areas that focus on different sections of the journey. So for instance, we have a learning experience area that focuses around the learning interactions, the learning process, the learning content. And then there's the engagement experience area that focuses rather on the journey itself from end to end. When you start, when you end, how can we guide you and motivate you to learn with us? And so from the business perspective, we're really interested in engagement and retention. So going back to why we're here talking about that, about this topic of asking awkward questions. Here's kind of like the situation I was having a digital meeting, an online meeting, like I guess lots of you are these days. And I was with a discovery team. We have a discovery team for each product team that is made up of the functions that basically figure out the problems that we have and ideate together. And that's why we call the discovery team. So we were a room with a product manager, product designer, UX writer, the marketeer, UX researcher, and we also have an engineer lead, usually bringing in the tech side. And the product manager came to us and said, hey, so you guys, we have these 2 features, right, that revolve around tracking the activity of our learners in the app. We have version A of the feature, well, feature A rather, where we show them what they're doing every day, whether they're doing a lección, a lesson, or a review. But we also have feature B that essentially is asking them which days of the week they want to learn. And this is a bit incoherent, right? Like on the one hand, you track every day and you celebrate that, but on the other hand, you also ask them, do you want to come what days? So why don't we figure out whether we want to align it to version A or we want to align it to version B, but we align them both. So this is the question that the product manager brings to us. And before I actually tell you what happens after, I'm curious to hear, imagine you're in the room, this is what your team is brought to. What kind of questions and thoughts come to your mind? What is it that you wanna say out loud at that moment? Or what kind of notes are you taking down? What kind of next steps are you imagining in your mind? I'm curious to see kind of like keywords that come to people's minds. So what do you want to ask the team, the product manager? What are you asking yourself? Why should we focus on that? The why, awesome. Why is it's one of the critical questions. So should we be focusing on these two features, or should we be actually looking at an entirely different type of feature? Why put the effort into this one? We also have, why does this matter? So compare, prioritize, why do this? I like the metrics one. What do we know about this? What are our UX research reports saying on this? Do we have any feature that's preferred currently? Is there even a better solution? So that sounds more towards like, can we make something better rather than these two? The team's goals, any artifacts, what are competitors doing? So checking out the scene out there. Yeah, so we have a couple about metrics, how much the feature is used, a very important why this, and also kind of like getting some qualitative insights. Cool, and about the goal, what are we trying to achieve this? What does the business need? Awesome. So I'm gonna take you through what I was thinking as I was seeing this. So basically, I was echoing a couple of things that you guys are saying. So what do we know about the behavior that we're nudging here? So actually, do we want to do day to day, or do we want to do alternative days? What's the problem that we're actually trying to solve? And also, as I'm thinking about these things, these features sort of like they're hinging on retention, right? Like they seem like the business goal is to get our learners to come back more often. So learning retention, that sounds like a learning habit problem. So actually building the habit to come back frequently. So come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or come weekly, right? So then this is essentially in green the question that I asked the product manager. So these two are actually habit features. Shouldn't we figure out first what our habit vision is? Like, what is the actual behavior that we want to move? So that's actually the questions that you guys asked earlier really kind of like speak to that. So what's the business goal? What's the desired outcome? What's the data that we have? And also, isn't this about retention and habit building? So you have to think that we were at a stage in which we were looking at two features, and the question was, do we do A or do we do B? So basically already solution discovered, right? Creating something and testing it. So we were at the third triangle or second diamond. We are looking at the available solutions, and the product manager wants us to go further down the road towards design and development. But with my question, I'm actually saying, do we have a habit vision? So I'm actually asking them, shouldn't we go back to problem discovery? What are the problems our users have with building a habit, a learning habit? So I'm curious. This is kind of like an awkward situation to put yourself in with your team, being the kind of like party pooper going like, hey guys, don't we have to take a step back instead of like do the fun stuff? So I want to know, how comfortable are you asking these kind of disruptive questions, the ones that, people might, get a bit nervous in their seats, a couple of sighs, a couple of stutterings around. So yeah, I see that we have a bunch of people that like asking questions. We're around 3.7 out of 5. But I do see that there's a curve going to the 5. So we have a couple of people who also quite like, we have kind of like the people in the middle and also people in the I love it that are making the average go to 3.8. So maybe later during the Q&A, I wanna hear the different feelings, the different perspectives. So cool. I just went on and I said, it's gonna make me unpopular. People are not gonna like me for this, but I'm gonna ask it, because I feel if I don't ask it, we're missing a big part of the picture. So I'm now wondering, okay, so you guys seem to like asking questions. You're like mid to loving it. So think of the last time that you asked an uncomfortable question. What was the kind of reaction you had from your team? Were they panicking? Why are you doing this to us? Like, what do you want from us? Or were they rather in denial? You know, like, we gotta move on. This is not relevant. Let's just keep going. Or rather more like the positive ones, bargaining. Okay, let's do it, but let's do it fast. Or acceptance, like, you are absolutely right. Let's do that 100%. So, okay, I see panic. People are pretty calm in your teams, not a lot of panic, but a little bit of bargaining and denial. Denial is sad. I hope at least you got some answers. Why not? Bargaining and acceptance. Okay, really interesting. I thought panic would get more more hits. We're still getting some answers even, but roughly we're there. So, okay. So it seems you also have quite a trusting team, the ones on the acceptance bar. So kudos to you. So essentially, the way that the team took it is, in this case, the reason why I'm giving this presentation is they accepted it. It makes sense, Anna. We should figure out our habit vision, because we cannot just keep creating features without having a common thread or some guardrails. So yeah, we were in solution discovery, but we do have to jump back to problem discovery. But there were a bunch of concerns from the product manager, from product director, like from previous experience, the teammates also, the things that could go wrong. So what could go wrong? Well, in the past, we've landed on research paralysis. So that moment where you're just like digging everywhere. Like, you have 1,000 questions, 1,000 resources, you spend weeks and weeks trying to synthesize, and kind of you lose your north. You don't really know where you're going. So that's definitely something that was in our team's mind. We really don't want to land there. It's not very satisfactory. Another issue is non-actionable results. So you do all your digging, you do some research, but in the end, you didn't really learn anything. You can't really move forward with what you've done, or you could, but you could have saved all that time. And one of the key things that are in our product managers' minds is like the timeline of value delivery. This is throwing us back in time, because if you're at solution discovery, you're like a couple steps away from concept testing and from starting to build the actual solution, whereas we're actually going back in time. So at the end of the day, this sounds like a massive enterprise. But then I asked, but what could go right? So we have, like, in the whole industry of self-improvement products, we have a steep drop in retention after a couple of weeks. You know, people are super engaged at the beginning, they are extra motivated, and after a little bit, the motivation wavers and they disappear, right? And this is, you can see this in any product that requires some sort of self-investment, be it gym subscriptions, be it language learning. So if we figure out what is the right habit behavior that we want to see in our learners, and we pair that with their learning, because learning requires exposure to, in this case, the language, and practicing it and listen to it. So learning requires that habitual behavior too. So if we kind of like build a vision that's maintainable and sustainable, when we have an amazing impact on retention and also on learner success. So business is happy and the learner is happy. So we can, you know, turn that dropping red curve into a healthy, you know, more steady, less droppy curve. So that's why I argued, if we invest in research time now and we kind of like validating, gain confidence in what probably works best, then we can go through the iterative phases of building solutions much faster and also much more coherently. So that made sense. Product manager says it makes sense. Team says, of course it makes sense. But what are we going to do about, past experiences, our traumas? What are we doing about the research paralysis? What are we doing about the inactionable results? So that's when we had to agree, starting off of the project, that we would do the just enough research. So I'm not sure if you've seen a video on YouTube or read Erica Hall's work, but essentially figure out what is it that you need to know, how do you need to prove yourself wrong, and then figure out what kind of research around it you need to do. You don't have to cover everything that exists out there. You have to just have the right lens and then invest in that. So we committed to do the just enough research, and also because of that, kind of like backwards design from the questions and the results that we needed. So what we need to know is X. So what kind of questions, what kind of hypotheses and predictions will emerge from that? And let's make sure that our questions, our hypotheses are solid. And then about the delayed timeline, I mean, timelines are hard. But we decided, let's time box this. It's Q3, like end of Q3, beginning of Q4. So let's give it a couple of weeks to plan the research, figure out the questions, and a couple of weeks more to interview. And I want some results in a month. So we promised to have like a time box of a timeline, and also do iterative learning, not just wait until the end of the process, but involve the team in the whole process, do collaborative research, collaborative synthesizing, and just learn week by week and integrate that with what we're already doing. So, and to the question, like to the point, this is a big project, it is, but there's ways of making it through it. So with that, I'm gonna now, the context, the emotions, you've shared already how people feel when you ask these questions. Sometimes it's great, sometimes not so great. And now I'm going to take you through the stages from, okay, this is our core question, and how do we get the results that we need? And before I share with you that information, I'm curious to know, what steps do you follow when you're trying to, explore the problem space, do some problem discovery? So maybe grab your phone and give us a couple of keywords. So let's see if we do the same, essentially. I also wonder if everyone here works with problem discovery and this framework of the triple diamond or the double diamond. I'm curious also to hear comments and questions about that. Okay, so we have some key questions. So let's figure out the why, the where, and the how. There's some how might we's, user research, definitely, desk research, absolutely, user interviews. Then we have some keywords like assumptions. What is the riskiest assumption that we have? How do we test it? Looking at the data, reviewing the data. Yeah, what do we already know that we don't need to redo? Quant data. Problem definition, making really sure that you have a solid problem definition. That's so hard, but also so important. Let's see, so user interviews and desk research seems to be the largest there. We also have some keywords like secondary research, the double diamond that we were just talking about. Yeah, awesome. I think mostly it's all around the type of data that we need, the critical questions, quant and qual, and doing some combing of what we already know, and we don't need to to go into again. Cool. So yeah, that is pretty much along the lines of what we did. So in stage one, we were preparing the research. What are we actually going to do so that we can figure this big question out? What our habit vision is. So first thing first, let's get the right people involved. I started talking to UX researchers. We have a gem of a UX research team at Babbel, so they're really sought after, which means you really need to make sure your time is well spent with them. So I talked to our UX researcher. We, in conversations with her, we were looking at the questions we had, and we had to rephrase them several times, because with her feedback, I could see, okay, this question you're asking here, I don't really know how to answer it. So you have to ask it a different way so that I can actually provide results that, will address that big question. So here you can see on the right hand of the slide, you can see the research plan that we were using. So this is sort of like the structure of the template that our UX research team uses to figure out what is it that you really want to know, and this is how we will help you. So what is the background, a bit of the context and the business goals, as we were talking about, why, what are we trying to achieve, what's the goal, the research objectives, the hypotheses and assumptions. This number 4 was kind of like the one that we spend the most time in collaborating together. And then once we had figured out 1 to 4, we went into conversation into the methodology, the participants, the screener. So based on the questions that you have, here is how you can actually try to answer that. And we had to discuss back and forth different methodologies. Is it going to be a survey? Is it going to be a interview? So if this is our own template, there's also Hannah and Jeff's research card that I think they're using in their courses, and it's really awesome. It's, a great tool to just be aware of what are the key things that you really need to bear in mind so that you are doing things right. So I'm sure they will share it afterwards. So yeah, we prepared the research, and along the process, these are the things that I suffered, struggled with, kind of like what I learned through the process. So first, I had too many questions. Like the team and we were really interested. It's a really interesting topic, but too many questions that we were trying to address with this research. So with the help of the UX researcher, we had to cut down. We cut down. She said, look, Anna, your questions are awesome, but we need to focus on the ones that will make the most impact and the ones that we can actually answer at this stage. So cutting down, you will have to cut down if you're doing this kind of research, probably too. The methodology was also something that we were going back and forth, but always coming back to, okay, is this methodology, is this survey, is this type of interview really going to bring us the insights that we need? So trying to predict the result we would obtain, that helped us figure out whether that's kind of like the research methodology we needed or not. Another issue we had to face was reduced capacity. So the UX research team, as I said, rocks at Babbel. So that means that they're busy all the time. So what is it that the product team that I was working with can do by themselves, just with kind of like a bit of hand-holding from UX research, but not a full embedded involvement. So in this case, I was conducting the interviews myself as a LX designer, and not the UX researcher. And I was preparing the facilitation workshops and co-working on the mirror boards with the UX researcher, rather than letting it all to herself. And also, as I mentioned earlier, importantly for the product manager and for the team, also morale, we wanted to learn fast. We didn't want to have to wait months until we had something valuable. So that's when we doubled down on collaborative research. We engage the team in thinking about questions, and also in observing the user interviews, taking notes. We run synthesis sessions with them. So there was every week touching base with the project, and not just me and the UX researcher disappearing for weeks long. The stage 2 of running the research. So we had our research plan. We were confident after some iterations around the questions. And this was really showing during the running of the research, during the interviews themselves, because thanks to that preparation, the UX researcher had recruiting variables for the type of people we wanted to interview. They were really clear and really well aimed, so that at the end of the process, we had valuable insights because we interviewed the people, kind of like the populations that we were interested in. And also, plus we had very small no-show rates. Actually, a lot of people showed up to the interviews. The preparation of the research plan also helped with the script and the props of the interview. So here on the bottom, you can see the Miro board that we used during the interview. So thanks to like an awesome script that was based on the research plan, I could just, as a non-UX researcher, interview 7 people and actually have pretty cool results and obtain very useful information. So one thing that did not work as well, so it worked well, but we could improve, is the capturing of the information, because note-taking and insights writing is actually a skill that takes some time to build. You need a little bit of guidance with it. So throwing a bunch of people who have not done that very frequently, or maybe never at all, was something that we should have prepared before. So maybe a training session with the discovery team, with the engineers and the marketeers on what kind of notes are we interested in, and how does one write an insight that one can use. So we went through the plan, we went through the actual execution of the research, which went pretty well. And then we had to look at the data, look at the information, and generate insights. So here I mentioned that we opted for collaborative research and collaborative synthesizing. We wanted to make sure that the team heard the users and took notes and understood what we were trying to find out, and also understood what the users were going through. So with the team, we organized several synthesis sessions where we were doing clustering, affinity mapping, so looking at all the sticky notes of all the notes we took and trying to find common themes, user needs, user problems. We also iterated on the process because we found, okay, this answers some of the questions, but can we get a more systematic analysis of the user needs? We also did then an empathy mapping with each of the 8 participants that we interviewed in the research. The team, UX writers, UX researcher, engineers, they sat with one participant at a time, and they did the whole empathy process so that we could then synthesize that into insights. So I mentioned that the benefit of this was, sharing the workload, getting everyone to kind of like participate and learn at an iterative pace, so that you don't have to wait forever to the results, but as part of the team, you're actually seeing results as you go. But also there's a couple of other reasons why it's valuable, and I wanted to share it with you. So on the one hand, I think having different people in the room that come from different roles and different life experiences gives you richer lenses. So you're not only just like the bunch of designers of the bunch of researchers that have similar backgrounds and probably will see the similar, red circles of insights. We also have another set of people with different lenses that might spot different types of insights that you might have missed before. So through that, you get more richness in the insights. You kind of like cover the blind spots that you might have had. Not everyone, obviously, but you have more options, more possibilities of getting it right. And also you get functions that usually don't get to listen to the user so often, like engineers, to empathize with the struggles and hear the problems from the mouth of the users. But through the generating the insights, we had the team empathizing. Yeah, we had some insights coming in on a regular basis, but we also realized how overwhelming the data can sometimes be. So I just showed a couple of slides before that we had a lot of sticky notes, a lot of information, and we had to have the whole team wrap their heads around this data and try to find patterns. So after a session, synthesizing together, everyone had a bit of a throbbing head and was also beaming with emotions and information about their users and their pains. So I think for next time, I like to sit down with a UX researcher, like the expert in this case, and kind of like write down like a bunch of expectations and guidance to make this process a bit easier next time, so that we don't expect like we're going to get all the insights at once, or kind of like a relativize how much as a non-expert we can achieve. That was stage 3, kind of like the learnings I took from that. And then from stage 4, so plan, execute, generate insights, but that's all great. But if you don't know how to share the insights, if you don't know how to frame that information in an actionable way, you haven't actually completed much, right? This is basically the moment where your project is gonna make it or just flop. So if I bring you back to the beginning of the presentation, I was mentioning the question that the product manager brought to us. He was saying, hey, we have these 2 features. Which one is kind of like the one we want to go with, and let's copy the other one to it, right? Like, let's align them in a way. So when I asked the question, hey, what is our habit vision? I was asking, what do we know about the habit opportunity space? What are the struggles of our users? What are the needs that they have and the opportunities we have there? So for that, we did the empathizing, the synthesizing, but we needed to have a visual artifact that actually told us kind of like what is the experience that they go through. So with the UX researcher, we sat down and we started mapping kind of like in a journey way from the beginning of thinking about a habit and a goal for learning, and iterating through it and achieving to consolidate that habit or failing to consolidate that habit. What are the stages that the users go through? And here you can see a little bit the artifact that we created with the sticky notes in red as the problems, the sticky notes in green as the needs, and then the yellow sticky notes at the bottom as opportunities that we heard there that we wanted to highlight. So this helped us, help the team, helped other designers and other product teams kind of like understand the experience. Okay, so I can see what the stages are for our users in terms of the habits and their problems and the needs. Some of them we found before, some of them are new. But when we brought this to the product manager and to the product director, they're like, this is awesome. Like I can really understand it, but I actually need to prioritize one of these. So how do I do that? Like, we need to pick one of these problems to solve so that we can start, working on delivering value, on creating solution to that problem and launching something so that we can, keep our users coming and happy. So then we were like, okay, this is clearly not doing that job. It's helping us understand the opportunity space, but it's not helping us prioritize that space. So then we went back to the drawing table, and then we repackaged this information so that we had a sort of a funnel view in which you had how fiery urgent the first problems were with the triple fire. If you don't solve these problems, it doesn't matter how many of the other problems you solve, they won't have much of an impact, because these are key and crucial and kind of like gates to unlocking the other problems. So here we learned we have to figure out how to repackage this information. It's not enough to create a readout where you have, your solution hypotheses and direct results to it. You also need to think about how to generate artifacts that actually help you take action. So with this information, we helped in terms of understanding the opportunity space. This helped a lot our product director in picking elements of this information for the 2022 strategy. So remember, I was sitting with the product team in end of Q3, beginning of Q4. So that's when the strategy was being shaped. And with this iterative type of work, and also with these kind of artifacts, we could use that information already to feed into the strategy next year. And then that's all great. You're like, oh, awesome. Like, it fed into the strategy. That's like a big achievement, like awesome. But then imagine like going back to your product manager and they're like, wait, but what is my team working on? Like, what are we actually doing? So this is where it's important. It was important also for us that we had one thing to focus on already at the beginning of Q1 so that we could sit, unpack a little bit that specific problem we had detected and already start building solutions around it. So we already had a focus for Q1 and Q2, and that's what the team right now is focusing on, the prioritized problem. So yeah, we went through the 4 stages and kind of like wrapping up. After this interesting experience, here are kind of like the key learnings that I take home with me. The first one is ask the awkward question. You might think people will stop liking you after asking the question, but I mean, that's fine. I mean, there's plenty of people in the world. So I think it's better to ask a question and not feel like, you know, weeks later, why didn't I not say this? Now we are building a feature that actually has no impact, or we just haven't really figured out, you know, the key information to build it right. The next learning is invest in the research plan, invest in figuring out your questions. It's a painful process for some of us. Like I definitely, you know, had several sessions with a UX researcher scratching our heads and scratching several questions and saying, no, this is not actually going to be testable and it has to be falsifiable. So spend the time there. You might suffer, but it's well worth it, and consult people who know how to do it if you find yourself a bit of like stuck. The UX researchers probably can help you. The third learning is collaborate. So not just, you know, try to do everything yourself, but involve the team in, you know, setting up the research plan, thinking about questions. Also, that as we're saying, you know, the more lenses you have, the more potential assumptions you might have missed that can be uncovered by those other lenses. You know, so ask them, what are we assuming here? What kind of data are we taking for granted? What are the questions that you have as an engineer? What are the questions that you have as a UX writer? And engage them in listening to the users and taking notes. It might take some time, and it definitely should take a little bit. You should invest a little bit of time in guiding your teammates through these stages, how to take notes, how to write synthesis insights. You know, it's an investment, but if you're doing, especially if you're gonna start doing continuous research and interviewing, it's definitely money and time well spent. And then this is kind of like a thing that happened to me again and again when I was doing the desk research, when I was doing the interview synthesis. I sometimes got lost in the data. So what I found useful is go back to the questions that you were asking in the beginning. Are you trying to get the information for that right now, or are you just going down a rabbit hole of some like interesting but weird fact that you know, like you just got absorbed by? If that's, you know, not answering your question, just drop it and go back to what actually answered the question. And then in the end, yeah, I just had to remind myself when I was getting a bit flustered, I'm learning here. You know, I'm doing things that are maybe out of my comfort zone, but I'm growing in it. The team is growing in it. So learning is going to happen, and you know, be happy about it. So yeah, I think that's it. I went a little bit over time. Sorry about that. But yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thanks so much. If you want to stop sharing the screen too, that's okay. I'll facilitate some of these questions with. We have a lot of amazing questions here. So thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you for that really wonderful talk. I had seen some of this in the beginning stages when you were going through what those questions were, and it's really fascinating to see what has kind of turned out of it from a personal sense, but also just seeing how the process has worked within your company. So I really appreciate you sharing that with our community today. But I'm just going to jump into the questions so we can get to as many of them as we can. So the top question that we have is, what's your process for helping the team address the concerns of what could go wrong to convince them to take that step backwards? So kind of thinking back to that first question, did you propose the solution, or did you facilitate a workshop? Like, how was that process for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was actually considering whether I should include a slide about that. So in this case, I think part of that moment in that meeting was also, I think as we were discussing, I was starting to create kind of like parallelly in a mirror board, like kind of like the key elements of you know, what I know from habit research, and why habit research is actually going to be very helpful for us to figure out these two features and what to do with them. So first, I just, you know, verbally tried to you know, express, like, if you look at these are not, I think back then we were calling them goal visualization features. And I was like, yeah, probably they visualize your goal, but don't you think this is actually tracking your habit? This is tracking how often you come, and kind of like asking simple questions and trying to explain why you think that way in ad hoc during the meeting was important, and also in the follow-up, essentially, I remember creating this visual of the 3-4 things that you need to know about habits. And this is our product and the kind of habits we're trying to build right now for our learners, which is not very coherent with each other. And this is what we could be doing, like, and kind of like move to, we could be figuring out the future of habits, and that would not only touch these goal features that we're talking about, but it would touch actually at different parts of the product. So it was a mixture of discussing it in the moment, and I think it actually, I had brought it up in another moment. So it might happen in several occasions that you need to bring it up. And if you notice that people are open to hearing about it, then just jump into creating something visual and super simple to understand, because I think that's what brought home the message home for the team, visualizing the in simple terms why you want to do this.
Yeah, I really love that suggestion because there's so much that you can communicate through like an artifact that you were talking about or a visualization that you can't always, it might take 5-10 minutes with words, but if you can just show that, it like saves people time, it gets people like on board in a different way. So I really love that suggestion. Um, so our next one is kind of related to questions too. So how do you rein in early questions in discovery? So how do you keep that conversation focused? Do you have any? Because I know you were talking about this a little bit. Like I'm also thinking about like when you were talking about paring down the questions in that time as well. So
Yeah. So this was an interesting process, and also kind of like an iterative one. I guess essentially the way I'm trying to remember it now, we wanted to find out from the desk research what is out there about habitual behavior. What has science found so far that really works in building a habit? So that kind of like was the overarching question we had. And from there, while reading the literature, looking at competitors, that's when the other questions started to come in, and what if we ask our users whether they prefer, to track the behavior or not track it, or come every day or come every second day. So like all of these questions were interesting, but there are different moments for different questions. So I guess it helped looking at this also going back to the double diamond or the triple diamond, and thinking any question that is about kind of like a potential solution, you probably don't want to ask it right away, because we're not looking at solutions at this moment. We're kind of figuring out how our users feel about problems. What are they, how are they trying to build a habit right now? What's working for them? What's not working for them? So that's one of the ways that we use this, like figuring out and expressing that there are moments for different questions. And right now we're not focusing on that type of question. And the other way also was, oh, I think I lost my thread. But I was going to talk a little bit about the first diamond, and when digging into the research and coming up with a bunch of questions from the research, also thinking about, okay, so we are proposing some solution hypothesis, and based on this scientific findings that we see in the research, and also considering what we know about our product, which is the retention curve that I mentioned, that is a bit steeper than we want it to be, and how often our learners are coming. So kind of like putting all the information together, and then from there we go to the assumption stage, right? So what is kind of like all the information that we do have and the information that we are taking for granted, and from there start to think, what of this is risky if it is actually, if this assumption turns out to be untrue, but we didn't test it because we thought, this is for sure this way. So this is also part of the process that guided us in choosing what questions. Actually, I think recently, Hannah, Jeff, I and Jenny published an article about this precisely, which is sometimes you want to ask bold questions, right? And get bold results over asking tiny questions that you kind of like maybe already kind of know the answer to. So asking the questions that are about risky assumptions and figuring those out. So it's not like a one simple cure to paring down the questions. There are several of them.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned like there's certain questions for also different phases that you're in. And I think addressing the like how do you rein in early questions, one of my favorite things is like idea parking spaces. So like if somebody has a question that is about the solution space, but we really want to keep people in kind of the problem space or the discovery area, is putting making them feel heard, saying like, I hear this is a great idea, but let's park that for later and see if it matches to what we found in discovery, which is a great tool, I think, to use as well. I'm going to do a couple rapid fire questions at the moment with a couple minutes that we have left. Um, I, yeah. So do you use this process with every new feature?
No.
Yeah.
Is rapid firing just like a one syllable answer or?
I mean, you can elaborate a little bit if you want, but
Yeah,
yeah, I
so
think it was an interesting question, I thought.
yes, and no, it really depends on how impactful and what stage this what was actually the word used? Was it feature discovery
It's just a
or
new feature.
with each new feature? No, I guess I would need a bit more time to explain, but yeah.
Yeah. And how many colleagues are involved in the research sessions with your users?
So it depends on time, on availability, actually. So we have an interviewer, we have a note taker that usually works on a mirror board, trying to visualize what we are going to be using afterwards. The interviewer sometimes takes notes also on the interviewing tool. And then whoever has the time at that moment in their calendar and can come and observe, they will join. So sometimes you might have note taker, interviewer, participant, and three other listeners, or four or five or six, depending on how interesting it is to other stakeholders. We sometimes also share it with people beyond our team in case they are interested in the question we're asking.
Yeah, great. It's really interesting to hear that because I know it can be a really different like kind of combination depending on the company. Okay, last question is how long did it take to go from that PM question or the question during that PM meeting to through research, prioritizing, and adding it to the strategy? Like what's the time frame that actually took?
So let's see. I think we're probably talking about okay, strategy. So strategy was being shaped around early December, and I think we were working on this between October and November. So essentially 2.5 months we were working here and there. So the team was not just focusing on this one single thing. We were also in different teams working on different problems and different things. So if this had been our exclusive work, probably like in working times, that would have been much less, say a month, but spread out through other types of work, it was then prolonged.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I really appreciate you talking with us today.